I think the speed of insight matters more today than it did even a year or two ago, because access to information is faster now than it ever has been. With the advent of generative AI, it's really easy to get information in simply a moment's notice. For example, at the top of the Google page, you'll get the answer to the question that you're asking without having to scan through a lot of links. So the point is that as consumers particularly get information faster, they're going to be making decisions a lot faster too. So it's really important for brands to be able to get their information, particularly about those consumers and how they make those decisions, as fast as they possibly can. The explosion of data available today has definitely changed what it means to know your customer, primarily because there is so much more data to go through in order to truly know your customer. And so oftentimes that can make it really difficult to know what to prioritize in order to know your customer, because there's so many different data points and so many different variables available. Oftentimes I see brands really struggle to know what data is most important. And so being able to identify what data is critical to really know your customer is a key asset to have. And a lot of times companies and brands that don't pay attention to their consumers or what their consumers really care about can in fact suffer. So as an example, just this week, I read about Panera, who has implemented a new plan to try and regain a lot of the growth that they have lost over the last few years. What they are focusing on is the consumer experience. Over the years, cost cutting has actually led to a poorer experience. For example, the type of lettuce in the salads and so forth. And so with this new plan, they're focused on improving the customer experience. But if they were in fact focusing on what their consumers want along the way, they probably wouldn't have made a lot of the decisions that they did. Another example would be that Brian Niccol brought the Sharpies back to Starbucks because that was part of the experience that consumers really placed value on. So understanding consumers, what they need, and ultimately what makes for a valuable, even emotional experience for them is something that companies need to do. If they don't, they will ultimately suffer. At Mindsight, we want to make sure that we're focusing on gathering the right data that we have understood through years and years of research to really identify what consumers do and what's important in making the decisions about what they do. In addition to that, we also make sure that we're focused on understanding new types of data that become available and how that may in fact be relevant to the data that really drives consumer decisions. That's the way that we really focus on separating signal from noise, if you will, so that we can get to the information that will drive brands' decisions and, to that point, the growth of those brands. One of the things that I think is truly special is to see a brand that can completely connect with the deeper human needs of its consumers. So one of the brands that I think does this incredibly well is a brand that we're very fortunate to work with, and that's Catalina Crunch. So Catalina Crunch has gone through a transformation, if you will, over the last year or so, in which they have really focused on making sure they deliver not only the functional benefits that their consumers are focused on, such as low sugar and high protein, but also, to that point, being able to address the needs of specific individuals. So as a low sugar brand, they actually are a brand that can be really appealing to those with type 1 diabetes. And I have found personally that this brand does a really important job in connecting to the emotional needs of its consumers. I say that in that my 16-year-old, whose name is Tag, actually has type 1 diabetes. And he was diagnosed 2 years ago. There's lots of Catalina Crunch in my pantry because it enables him to be able to enjoy a life that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do. That's obviously really meaningful to me as his dad, and being able to watch him have a life that is fulfilling as a result of being able to have foods and or snacks that he likes, but aren't going to have a negative impact on his health, is something that's really meaningful. In fact, really difficult to put into words. There are lots of brands that have data, but what separates the brands that actually grow from the brands that don't is they understand what to do with that data. They have the clarity regarding what should come next. Just yesterday, I had a partner mention that they didn't want to do a segmentation study because in the past, all of the segmentation studies that they've seen were really large summaries that just sat on the shelf and didn't ever get utilized. Well, in those cases, what makes all the difference is being able to utilize the information that's provided. So we haven't done our jobs as researchers if you don't understand what to do about the data, because that makes all the difference in whether or not a brand will grow.